feature where I didn't want like both paths to have a liquid in it, because it is such a kind of like unique and interesting thing. And you know, I knew that some people were going to be like more in love with that kind of like dynamic feeling of the liquid, the like unpredictability of it and stuff like that. And then, you know, the other things like just the openness of the level design, that was another way that, you know, I tried to separate the two branches and things like that.
That's awesome. One of the things we talked a lot about when we did our Spelunky 1 documentary was the evolving nature of the damsels, where you added in the pug during development on Spelunky 1, or I guess the console version was where all that stuff came out. Or maybe you patched the PC version. Obviously, it's different this time around as well. We have no hunky men. We have no damsels. We have a beautiful pug. A cat, which I have to tell you sounds exactly like our cat. And whenever there's like 2 of the meows it does, every single fucking time we turn around to be like, is Hero in the room? He's like, yeah, he's a similar sort of fat, ginger looking thing. And a hamster as well. Was that on the design doc early, swapping them out?
Yeah, I just decided let's just go all in on the pets. You know, the pug ended up being like kind of a mascot for the game and the most popular damsel. Whoops. I always forget to do that.
You're a popular man this week. It's probably all your friends asking for solutions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just another spam message. Yeah, no, that was there from the beginning, and I don't know. It just kind of felt like it made sense with like the main characters sort of being like the children of the characters from the original game. It felt kind of weird for them to be rescuing like hunky people.
I hadn't considered that actually. Yeah, it's a good point.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe part of it is just me becoming a parent and you know, kind of. I don't know. The game's still very dark in a lot of ways. So I don't know that it completely makes sense. You know, from that perspective.
Yeah, you can still blow up turkeys and spike those little helper people. That actually, are those guys way smarter? They seem way smarter than before. The AI folks you get out of the like the helpers.
Yeah, they are.
They're like so helpful, man. It's like having a second player, like half the time.
Yeah, we wanted to improve those guys, and they appear a lot more frequently in the game.
Yeah. And earlier. Maybe as well. I feel like I'm always
they do. One of the things that we do in Spelunky 2 is that the coffins where you unlock the player characters now, those coffins don't go away when you play again. They just replace with hired hands.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
And so that's partly why you see them more frequently, and that's kind of just done for a consistency, stability reason, because in Spelunky 1, you know, people who speed ran the game, they would very often reset their save because like playing the game a lot and unlocking the player characters actually changes like the chance of getting certain things because those coffins don't appear. Like getting a helper, right?
Right.
You don't get that once you've unlocked the character. Like the chance of getting a helper basically goes down the more you play because of that.
Funny. Is that also why you added the seeded runs as well? Was that like another nod to the speedrunning community?
Yeah, we basically got a big list. I asked Saturnin, he's the creator of Moss Ranking, which is like the big Spelunky speedrunning site, to just give me like a list of I don't even know if I asked. I think he just gave it over. He said, "Here's like a list of like community requests," and so I was like, "Okay." Well, we took a look at it and added the ones that made sense. And so I mean, we definitely had that community in mind when we were working on Spelunky 2, because they've done such a great job just kind of keeping Spelunky 1 active with all the different challenges and stuff that they've come up with. You know, like like in the past year, their challenges have gotten so insane. It's just like you could tell these people are just getting super bored in some ways with the original game, that they've got to invent these just absolutely ridiculous challenges where it's like, you
Max
know,
low,
low
no go hell.
percent going to hell and only using your whip, and they're just like all these variables that they're kind of turning on to make it fun for them.
They're able to do like eggplant runs in their sleep now, so it's just they have to find some reason to keep the fun alive, or keep it's like they're murderers. They need to like up the ante constantly to try and get that endorphin rush.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like they're starting to kind of deteriorate and accelerate their madness. So
let's talk a little bit about, I guess, that then. You know, the enduring legacy of this game, right? Because obviously one of the coolest things that we talked about during our documentary was just how much the community took this game and ran with it. Obviously you designed the game in this very interesting, like, you know, all about uncovering secrets, and then that coupled with the sort of systemic design of it, just it created not just like secrets that you had buried really deep in the game, but also ones that you hadn't considered that sort of just emerged from this game being popular and people messing around with the systems in it. I have to imagine that was very much on your mind when you were making Spelunky 2, just setting everything in motion so that like there will be things that people will discover, you know, weeks into the game, months into the game, and perhaps years. Is that the case? Were you like spending a lot of time trying to make sure that sort of happened again?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think the main thing was just, the secrets had to go deeper, right? Like you can't just have Hell 2.0 or whatever.
Right.
So I just didn't feel like it would be quite enough, and so there's definitely stuff buried in the game for like the really hardcore Spelunky speedrunners and stuff like that. And you know, I figured that for them, actually people have been having a harder time with Spelunky 2. Like people who played a lot of Spelunky 1 have been having a harder time with Spelunky 2 than I expected. I think, you know, the game fundamentally is pretty similar, but I think all those little changes added up actually make it quite a new experience, even for people who played a lot of the first
Spark Trap Steric.
You know, like Man vs. Game, the streamer, you know, he played a ton of Spelunky 1, and you know, he was like one of the first people to play Spelunky 1 and stream it like on Xbox 360. So we actually asked him to help us promote the Steam version and the daily challenge by doing some runs with other streamers before the game released. And right before Spelunky 2 came out, he's been streaming himself, trying to just get all the achievements in Spelunky 1.
Right.
And so he's like literally going straight from Spelunky 1 to Spelunky 2, and I've kind of seen that. And he's having a lot of trouble with Spelunky 2. You know, I think in a good way, because I think it would be kind of sad if he just went straight into Spelunky 2 and it was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to take all of my skills from Spelunky 1 and just blast through the game. Now, it's kind of my worry that might happen, because that's very hard to anticipate, you know, exactly what that's going to be like, but it seems like it is different enough, and there are enough new things that it's been quite a challenge even for those people. And I actually think like now is a great time for new players to get in, because I don't feel like the game is like that much harder. I think it's really that newness and that, you know, those differences. So if you're not familiar with Spelunky 1, I think if you come in, I think the playing field is like relatively level at this point. If you get in now.
I'm really interested in this, because I have also felt like I am having I think my expectation, having played a lot of Spelunky 1, is that I can come into this and be like, all right, here we go. I'm well trained at this. I've been playing this for years, but I don't know if it's the couple of, you know, it controls the same in so many ways, but there are enough changes that I'm coming in with all this confidence, but then I'm like coming up against like, oh no, but I should be more scared, because then I'll probably learn a bit faster or something. a brief tangent, and next week on the podcast we have the folks from Rogue Legacy 2 on, who are
awesome,
making us say I talked to them just yesterday. I had a great conversation about all this, and we also talked about the challenges of making a sequel that feels like it's harder, because also Rogue Legacy 2 for me coming into it does feel harder than the first game, even if it perhaps isn't on the face of it. We were kind of talking about how the landscape has changed, that like there are people have been playing games like it's like the Dark Souls 2 thing, right, where when they made Dark Souls 2, they made a game for people who completed Dark Souls 1, and it was way more difficult. So you're saying that wasn't your intention with this. It's more like, why do you think people are finding it harder? Is it because they, like, those returning players are maybe more confident than they should be, or also is this just what's going to happen for the first week of a game? That like we're too close to launch. 4 or 5 days from now, people will probably be where you expected them to be with difficulty. What's your sense about the difficulty with the game?
It seems like it's gonna last for a while. I mean, I just seeing the progress of people playing the game, like, just going on the Spelunky 2 Twitch page and just kind of like scrolling down, you see a lot of brown, like a lot of the kind of reddish brown color of the first area of the game.
I love that. What a great piece of QA you have. Who needs heuristics?
The areas are very color-coded, so it's really funny because you can kind of see, I feel like you could see the overall progress just by scrolling, and it's just like a bunch of, colored squares. And like the more brown it is, I feel like the harder time people are having with the game, because it means they're all just still stuck in the first area. As to why that is, I think, when we were working on the game, like on Spelunky 2, we did not spend a ton of time playing Spelunky 1 and just comparing the two. We really just made Spelunky 2 to feel good to us now. So, there might be, part of it might be we have a team that is experienced with Spelunky 1, and we've kind of tuned the game to us. But that said, I don't feel like I'm really like a great Spelunky player, compared to a lot of these streamers who I think have maybe played Spelunky 1 as kind of like, like seriously played it, and not just through testing, but have like seriously, tried to play the game and beat it and discover all this stuff. Who would probably spend more time playing the game and understand it better than I do. I think it's really just all the little differences. And I think some significant changes, like shoplifting being a little more punishing in Spelunky 2. So I think a lot of the inclinations of Spelunky 1 players are getting punished a little bit by Spelunky 2, where the game's not necessarily like a lot harder, but it's different, and it's kind of subverting some of their expectations. When I play Spelunky 2, I actually tend not to rob the shops if I can really help it.
Right.
And I think that's a much more viable strategy, even like at a high level, to not rob. But these people from Spelunky 1, these players from Spelunky 1, they cannot help themselves when they see a shop. It's just like, it's like just seeing like a juicy, like baited trap, and they know that in Spelunky 1 they could easily just like grab that bait and then get away, and they've kind of been like
conditioned, or
it's like a condition. Exactly, that's the word. It's like a Pavlovian response.
It's hard to
just start drooling when they see a juicy shop.
I've always heard that from developers, that it's very difficult to unteach something from a player, to sort of get them to an old dog and new tricks is one thing, but trying to get a dog to unlearn a trick is almost harder again. I've taken a bunch of your time. I got 3 little questions I want to ask, just little sort of design related questions about stuff that you've added or changed in the game that that are very early stuff that I just wanted to sort of talk about, because I think they're interesting, and it'll give us a little bit of insight into your sort of mindset coming into this. Just 3 of them. The first one, and they're all like pretty small things. The first one is in 2-player, when you save a pet, you both get a heart now. What was the idea behind that? It's great. it's very interesting, especially as me and my wife play very differently. Sometimes I'm too aggressive and I get hurt a lot. Sometimes I'm a bit more skillful at getting through areas and she gets hurt a lot. So we're doing a lot of like passing pets before we enter the door. And obviously when we both got licked this time, it was like, hooray! But where did that come from? Just, you know, giving that to the player, because it's a pretty big game changer for two-player.
Yeah, I think it was just to make rescuing the pet more of a cooperative effort, and just having everybody's incentives aligned with working together and getting the pet to the exit. And yeah, I mean, two players it's meant to be like fun. It's just like more of a fun way to play, and it is about cooperation. There are enough ways to kind of like step on each other's toes in multiplayer. So yeah, that was just one area where it just felt like, yeah, let's just be nice, you know. And yeah, and then people won't fight over the, you know, who gets to send the pet through the exit.
Right.
Yeah.
How about mounts then? Obviously, this is a big system, it feels like, but I'm just interested in, like, what was the main desire to include mounts in the game?
I think it felt like just a fun way to interact with an enemy, essentially. You know, like the mounts, they start wild. A lot of them will attack you, and it just seemed like it'd be, you know, like with Spelunky, you know, we wanted to make sure that the controls stayed very simple, because I think that's an important part of Spelunky. Is just really of like the attack button, which does so much. You know, you can whip, you can throw, you can pick up items. And so like within the constraints of those controls, like how can we come up with more interesting things that you can do? And getting to ride an animal just seemed like a really fun and interesting thing. You know, you can already hold an item in your hands. You can already wear something on your back, like a jetpack or a cape. And so it kind of just like the natural progression is like, well, let's just have something that you can sit on too, right? So then you're just like, you know, it's like kind of like thinking about the character as sort of like a doll, and you know, like where can you stick things? Well, there's only one more place that you can kind of like stick an item, and so the mounts sort of seem like a natural way to do that.
That's cool.
And so yeah, I wasn't entirely sure how it was going to work, because it makes you 2 tiles tall. I think that was the trickiest thing about the mounts. And initially, it was a little hard to get around, and also the mounts tended to die a lot. So we had to kind of like, that was something where we had to keep kind of working on it over time to make them viable, and just make them like, you know, they started out, I think, pretty bad, and that was one of those things where we just kept making it better. Where it was just like, you know, should we add this? Should we add this? And it was like, well, if it makes the mount better, let's just add it. So like, we gave every mount a double jump, basically, because yeah, once you're on the mount, like you can't climb a rope anymore.
Was that always the case as well? That you couldn't climb a rope when you were on the mount?
Yeah, that was always the case. That's the risk reward, or did it just make logical sense that you wouldn't? I think that was more like it just made logical sense, where it's just like, I don't know, you'd be like squeezing a turkey between your legs while you're pulling yourself up. It just, I couldn't think of how.
Realism in Spelunky's universe there.
You know, I think it's important that as ridiculous as video games can get, they do have to have like a certain kind of working logic.
Okay.
And I guess that's where the line is drawn with Spelunky. Like, you cannot just like squeeze an animal between your legs and pull yourself up a rope. I mean, their legs are tiny. It's just, it sounds silly, but like I really just could not imagine a way of making that like look good. I don't know.
Right. I like it.
You know, those kinds of things do matter, because they help make certain things either feel intuitive or not intuitive.
Yeah.
And there's already a lot to learn, so you do want these things to feel as intuitive as possible. And yeah, a lot of like design decisions that do end up having like a big effect on the gameplay do start as just thematic decisions, like this just makes sense, right? If, you know, we have this and this in place, it just makes sense that, you know, this would be the case.
Right. It's interesting.
And it starts there, and it can have a pretty big effect, you know, but it's an important part of games. Like, you know, it's like in chess how the knight is the only piece that jumps, and that just it kind of makes sense, right? Like you're on a horse and the horse
Right.
can leap. Like those kinds of little links, I think are yeah, they're things that they're links that game developers think about a lot, and it's not just like a bunch of abstract rules. Like it matters, you know, what the game is about, like story-wise, character-wise, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sort of making a joke that like, oh, it's, you know, that type of consistency. Surely it doesn't matter, but obviously it does. And having you explain it there reminded me that one of the realizations I had yesterday when I was playing, or the day before yesterday, was that I was on a different mount later in the game and realized that it had an attack, and my brain immediately went, oh, I wonder if the turkeys do too. And I imagine a lot of that is the foundation of there being this sort of consistent logic throughout the experience of the game that then I'm extending into these new features that you've
It's
also
gotta be
had.
right side.
It's funny talking. I love talking about Spelunky. I think people who don't make games love talking about Spelunky because there's something about the systemic nature of the game that's very easy to grok for people who aren't designers. Maybe not to like understand and like to be able to make their own game like this, but it's like that. A lot of these really complex things that are happening under the hood in games when it comes to design just feel a little bit closer to the surface for the layman or for players, and I think that's one of the reasons why people really love talking about this sort of stuff. I want to ask you one more of the sort of like ones that I have, and it's maybe my favorite new addition to that first area is the ghost jars because I have terrible impulse control, and this is like, if me and my wife get divorced, might be over these ghost jars. So there's these jars in the game now which have, it's a diamond, right? It's like the most maybe one of the more expensive jewels you can get in the game. I think.
Yeah,
I remember
that's the more valuable. That's the most valuable one.
The ghosts turned them. You could sort of shepherd the ghost around the gold in the first game, right? It would turn them into diamonds. But in this, there's a jar that if you smash, there's a diamond. But if you smash the jar, the ghost like just comes right away.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, you're an evil bastard for putting this in the game. Where did it come from? What was the idea behind this?
That was actually another feature that we added. Primarily to start, it was primarily for speedrunners, just as a way to get the ghost to arrive earlier, so that they can kind of choose when the ghost comes. Because I noticed with a lot of like high score runs where they're trying to get the ghost to come and turn all the gems in the level to diamonds, that there ended up being a lot of waiting if they got kind of all their setup done, and then they're just really waiting for the ghost at that point. So it really just is a way for them to kind of decide when the ghost comes. And then it just started getting more interesting once we actually added it. We added the diamond, and that creates like a risk reward kind of thing for everybody, you know, to like, you can make extra money, but you're gonna have the ghost come earlier, and it also just makes thematic sense because the ghost kind of turns gems into diamonds, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a hint there. But it started as a speedrunner thing.
That's what amazing.
Like actually, I think that was one of the
List of demands.
I think that was a specific request on that list of requests that I was talking about. But it did not say like add a ghost jar. It was just like, it'd be nice if there was a way to make the ghost come earlier, possibly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And the satisfaction of being of carrying it to the end and then just like whacking it like a piñata and just getting it and running in the door is like just so satisfying.
Right, but yeah, you just got to be careful on that trip to the entrance.
Yeah,
you don't break it somehow.
You drop it. It's like an Indiana Jones thing. It's like stepping on the wrong plate or something. Suddenly you're like, we gotta go.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Derek Yu, congratulations on the launch of Spelunky 2. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. How are you doing this week? The game's out. You know, you feeling chill? Are you doing a lot of press, or is there a lot of like patching going on? Kind of, where's your headspace at the moment?
Yeah, it's in that interesting place where you've released the game, but your work's not done, but you feel like you should relax, but you also can't, and it's I mean, I think every game developer feels this way. It's just releasing a game. It's really not like, you know, winning the Super Bowl or something like that.
Right.
It's kind of just immediately the beginning of like the next step of the development. But it's been a lot of fun. I've been watching tons of streams. In general, I'm much more chill than I was with Spelunky 1. I think when we released Spelunky 1, Andy and I were both pretty burnt out, and I think also just pretty nervous, and I had a hard time like watching people play the game. So I was just like very concerned about things popping up in the game while they were playing, that, you know, bugs or just like people not having a good time, and just kind of being stressed out about that. This time around, I am feeling much more chill and just loving watching people play the game and die in crazy ways, and just like cracking up doing that. So it's been I think a more fun and relaxed release, but yeah, we still have a lot to do. And my sleep schedule is just completely like topsy-turvy. Working primarily with a team in Spain,
right,
and a musician in Norway.
Oh, we didn't even talk about the returning talents for
Eric.
That's awesome.
Came back, and I don't know. There's a lot to talk about with the audio too, but maybe we can save that for another time.
Another time. Maybe, who knows? If you ever want to do a second documentary on Spelunky, we're always up for it.
Sure, it'd be fun to get everybody together, get the whole picture.
Awesome. Derek, thank you so much. Enjoy the week that's in it, and thanks so much. It's out on PlayStation 4 now, and it's coming out on Steam as of this recording next week, or like 2 weeks' time or something?
On the 29th of September, yeah.
Awesome, cool. And then I'm sure you'll have news on other stuff, ... right?
Yeah, definitely. Ongoing.
Yeah.
Development continues.
Exactly. Awesome. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for watching or listening to this week's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. And we'll see you next time. Good luck.
Alright, be right back. We back.
Introducing Google Fiber. Fast internet. Without tricks, annual contracts, hidden fees, surprise fees, bundles, or installation fees. And most importantly, without interruptions. Fair internet for all.
How long is this?
Google Fiber. Fewer interruptions. More internet.
Your summer starts here.
So wait for this guy.
Time to save on a new Toyota and get out and have some fun. Catch a great deal today.
Did you know every new Toyota comes with Toyota Care at no additional cost? The great deals just keep getting better. Toyota, let's go places.
Get up there.
Ladies and gentlemen, super excited to bring you a very, very special guest. The one, the only, Derek Yu, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the podcast. We're super excited to have you here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
There's so
My
many
pleasure, my
crabs.
pleasure. I want to jump right, well, I don't want to jump right into it. We were talking like a little bit off camera for a minute. And this is the first time Derek and I have met. And you talk about, you know, you're balancing a lot. You just have a game release and you have all these inquiries of podcasts and things like that. How do you, number one, how do you balance that in terms of working on the game and then making time to do this?
Oh, it's tough. Yeah, this is a tough part of game development for me. Like, you know, you spend 3 to 4 years
H
just
calls in a
behind
gear.
the computer, just working on the game, and you're like,
You wouldn't pick up
oh, I
very
can't
well.
wait till this comes out, and you know everyone's gonna get to play it, and then it's like as
I
you
made
know, release
myself sad.
approaches, you start getting, you know, approached by press, and people want to do interviews and stuff. If you're, you know, if you're lucky, like I am, to get to that point, and it's really cool, but it's also just such a shift in your day-to-day life and what you're used to, you know. And like as a game developer, like I'm a pretty introverted person, and so I'm much more comfortable just working on the game, you know, talking through Slack and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like it's just a big shift, I think, in terms of like my mentality. But that's kind of, it comes with being an indie developer, I think, in particular, because you just have to wear a lot of hats when you're an indie developer, you know, like you're in charge of like your own marketing and stuff. You don't, you know, like I don't have like my own community manager or anything like that. So I'm kind of doing it all. And so a lot of times I do think about it like being an actor in some ways, where like I have to take on different roles, you know? Like I have to be a different person when I'm like coming up with ideas. I gotta be a slightly different person when, you know, I'm getting like feedback about the game, because, you know, all of a sudden I can't be like the super sensitive artist, right? Like I gotta be, you know, because it can be tough to, I think, get like the fire hose of feedback that you do once the game is out, and you gotta sift through it. And, you know, sometimes people aren't happy about something in the game, right? And with like the internet being what it is, you know, they're not necessarily gonna like give you the feedback in like the most constructive manner, right?
Really?
So, yeah. Who would have thought? So, you know, I kind of have to be like a little more, you know, have a little more like ice water in my veins when I'm in feedback mode and stuff like that. So, you know, it's all me, but it's like I have to kind of like activate different parts of myself. And this is just a part of game development where it's just much more social, and, you know, I'm just getting a lot more feedback. And so, yeah, you know, as I transition from release mode to post-release, I gotta kind of like get in that mindset.
Well, it's funny because we got on the camera for a couple minutes, and like you're very dynamic, and you mentioned something off camera. You're like, yeah, I'm thinking about maybe streaming a little bit, and you know, and I'm sure you just said that in jest, but like, what are your thoughts behind doing something like that?
I got into Twitch like fairly recently, you know, even though we did a lot of work with streamers on Twitch for Spelunky 1, like to help us announce it and stuff. Like I didn't really get into watching Twitch actively and being like a member and, you know, chatting and stuff until like a few years ago. And yeah, I've just been watching, and I realized that a lot of game developers actually stream game development. and it seems fun. It seems like just a fun thing to do to, for me
Why?
to just stream some game development and like chat with people.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of maybe a way to like, be a little more social online, like during the development itself.
So
And then maybe when when it kind of comes to like post-release time, I'll be more ready to.
So for you, talk about being social and things like that, and I think we can all maybe like think about like you working for 3 to 4 years on a game, just kind of locked down. But is it really like that for you? What is when you're in the thick of development, are you like walled off and like that's all I'm doing?
Yeah, I mean, it can be like that. Obviously, like I spend time with my family and like my IRL friends and stuff like that. A lot of whom are not game developers also. I mean, obviously this year, I've been particularly isolated and just focusing on work. But yeah, I don't know. I tend to, with development and, I tend to keep it pretty closed off in general. I like to kind of have time for feedback on the game, and then a lot of time to just think about the game and work on it with the team.
You brought up your IRL friends. Do they like have an idea of the magnitude that you've had on the games and how beloved your games are? Are they just kind of like, oh, that's Derek, like that's what he's doing, or is it somewhere in between?
I think it depends. The ones who
Why?
play games will be like, oh my gosh, like I actually saw your game on such and such website, or I was listening to like a podcast or watching a video or something, and it came up, and they think that's cool. But I don't know. For my friends, I'm just
Top
me.
left.
So
Whoa.
it's good. It's humbling, which I think is good. But I always think it's cool when it does reach my friends who like are just casually into games, or the ones that like really are not into games at all, when they've like actually heard of something I did, like something trickled down to them, then I know that something happened that was good.
And this is not the Derek You Personal podcast, but I just gotta ask for you, like when you're not playing games or developing games, like what do you do for fun to like recharge your creative energy, or what do you do if you have like free time, with which the family I know can be limited? What do you like to do?
Now, I like hanging out with my family, and I mean, we do play lots of games at our house. My daughter, like this year, she really got into Animal Crossing and a lot of Nintendo games. We play some hardcore stuff too, like she really
Animal
likes
Crossing, yeah.
beat 'em ups. We play through a lot of beat 'em ups together. For her, I'm always looking for games where she can play as a female character, because that's just like it's like really important to her, right? And so beat 'em ups are like a type of retro game where most of them have at least like one girl character that she can play as, and she loves it. And they're actually pretty straightforward. You just move around and press a button and just start wailing on somebody. you gotta tell them like, this is not what you do in real life. If you find like a turkey on the street, do not pick it up and eat it for health. But yeah, no, it's a lot of fun, and I've got a wide variety of interests as far as gaming goes, and I really like a lot of these old retro games, and it's been kind of an interesting challenge, I think, to find games to play with her, like of all kinds. So yeah, we play Nintendo, we play like old retro arcade games, like 16-bit games, stuff like that. All kinds of stuff.
Do you remember?
It's Streets of Rage 4, actually, speaking of beat 'em ups, yeah, Streets of Rage 4 was like one of her favorite games this year. She loved playing as Blaze and Cherry, and she had some like super exciting moments. Like, there was one of the bosses, like I died early, and it was all up to her, and I was like, I said that, I was like, it's all up to you. You could do this. She's like, I don't think we're gonna win. And she like pulled it off, you know, and they do that slow-mo at the end when you beat the boss. And she's like, oh my gosh, feel my heart. And I like, you know, I like felt her heart. Her heart was just racing. It was like the most exciting moment of her life. So it was really cool.
Is there any games that you've played or that you're looking forward to playing with her? You're like, oh, when she's ready, we can play this together. Or is there anything that, you know, that's maybe holds a spot for you that you're really excited to potentially play with her?
I mean, you know, a lot of my favorite games are not appropriate for her yet. Yeah, I'd love to play like Dark Souls with her or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think she'd have a ton of fun like creating a character, and I think there are a lot of great like female characters in those games. You know, like I don't know, Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower or whatever, and I think she'd really get into it. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a while because yeah, she is like I think fairly sensitive to scary stuff still. You know, even for her age, so it's gonna be a while. But yeah, I think there are a lot
I will
of
never
great,
play Dark Souls.
female-led games that are just not appropriate for her yet. And we just gotta take it one step at a time.
Bayonetta, you're gonna hold off on Bayonetta for a while?
Yeah. No, she's familiar with Bayonetta actually through Smash. So she's gotten to play as Bayonetta in Smash, but yeah, not ready for the core games yet.
for all the parents or potential parents listening right now, like, how did you reach that subject with her? Did you start her on a specific game and you're like, hey, let's start with this and see if she likes it? Or how did you approach that, you know, coming from the industry and having like a lot of fun and being such a big part of your life?
Yeah, I started her, I feel like the very first game she played was maybe the Link Between Worlds. Yeah, that was it. I had a 2DS and I let her mess around with that, and she was just like a baby at that time. And I wasn't even sure she knew what was going on, but she was just like pressing all these buttons and seemed like she was having a good time. I'd say the first like real game that she started playing was Mario Kart. Mario Kart 8. Yeah, Deluxe, I think. Maybe we started on Wii U or something like that. And that was like a great place for her to start playing. And initially she was nervous to play, but I put her on just a time trial with like no other characters racing with her. And it was really cool to watch her development. And she started.
There's already one on the tour.
Very steady. You could just,
Why'd you
know,
put another
at first,
one
like,
there?
she couldn't even get around the track. And then she would like get around, do one lap, and not be able to finish in time. There's actually the like 10-minute limit on the time trials where it just cuts you off at that point. And then eventually she was able to do that in under 10 minutes and get faster and faster.
Wow,
Then
she's a
eventually she'd be
speedrunner.
able to play with me and her mom together, but no computer players. Like playing with the CPU is too scary. And then, you know, eventually she was playing with the CPU and us, and we were like on the same team. And then eventually she got to the point where she could just play
Why?
on her own against the CPU.
Why?
And it was really cool. And yeah, Mario Kart, it's a game where you can play as the princesses, you know? And I think that really helped her get into it. And, you know, I think one thing I've realized is, yeah, for her, it's so important that she gets to like play as the princesses and things like that. And, you know, that was just something that came
Alright,
up
that'll work.
organically. It's not like,
Oh, that's gonna
you know, I didn't
fuck
really like
things up
bring it
though.
up with her. It's just we played video games together, and she, you know, would like ask questions like, "Why can't I play as the princess in, you know, Super Mario Brothers or whatever, or Zelda?" And then, you know, we started talking about it, and I'd have to kind of explain like, well, you know, these are like just traditions in video games that kind of started with like the earliest games, but now they're starting to let you play as, you know, more and more princesses and girls and stuff. I just had to explain like it can be hard to, I think, break out of these traditions, because it is true when you're making a game. I think this is something I've experienced as a developer also, is just like you are very much kind of bound by traditions and what came before, and you know what like your favorite games did, and you have to sort of mentally think very hard about certain things to like break out of that. Like, you know, when I was a kid designing games, a lot, all my games were just like, oh, this is like Castlevania, but I'm like changing it a little bit. And you're not really thinking about like why Castlevania does certain things it does. You just know like, I like Castlevania, and so Castlevania did it this way. I'm gonna do it like this way. I'm just gonna like change the characters around or something like that. So, games are so complex too. So it's like for any particular game, it's
Fucking
really
hell,
hard
that
to
lava
put
man.
100% effort into
Don't.
like every aspect of the game. So there are going to be certain parts where you're just going to want to like do it the way other games do it, so that you can put your energy into the parts that are like most important to you.
What would be an example of that for your most recent game? Like with Spelunky 2, what are some traditions that you like followed and some that were really important? You'd be like, I want to push here and I want to do
So
something.
with Spelunky 2, I really felt like I was able to, think about everything kind of as deeply as I wanted, because at that point it's like the third game in the Spelunky series. So, a lot of the stuff that I didn't have to think about were from the previous Spelunky games. And so, I guess what I'm saying is like, the inspiration came from previous Spelunky games as opposed to like other people's games that I'd played and been inspired by. But for like Spelunky, let's say Spelunky Classic, right? Like the original freeware pixel art game, I was mostly focused on just the roguelike meets platformer design there, right? Like that mix
Sounds
was
okay.
it was a new thing at that time, and so I had to spend like a lot of energy thinking about how to make that work. So as a result, like I wasn't thinking super hard about the theme, about the story, about things like that. Those I kind of it's just like the first thing that popped into my head, And the best ideas are never like the first thing that pops into your head. Because the first thing that pops in your head is always just like inspired by some other art that you've seen, right? Once you start getting to like the second thing, the third thing that you think of, that's when you start getting into the better ideas. Those are the ideas that are deeper, that are more personal, that I think are more interesting and unique. But it's very hard to have like, when you're working on a game, to have every part of the game be like one of those ideas that's a few steps removed, right? And so, that's a reason why like tropes exist, basically, is, a lot of that is just because, hey, this part of the game was the most important to me. As a result, like these other parts, I kind of had to like go into tropey territory.
You gotta.
And it also depends, I think, on your experience as a game developer. And obviously, the younger you are and the more inexperienced you are, the more you're going to kind of draw from that step one thought, right? And the more like, you're going to be like, well, I really like Mega Man. I'm going to make like a Mega Man style game. And you're going to have a hard time thinking about how to do like
Shots taken at
characters to, like,
20xx.
your Mega Man style game that doesn't have that Brady Bunch like grid to it. You just won't be able to think like outside of that, outside of your inspirations. And so that's something that takes experience. And I think that's also something, with Spelunky that it's a skill that I've kind of developed throughout the series. And it's also gotten easier because the further I get into Spelunky, the more I can just draw from Spelunky and what's unique about Spelunky versus like the other games that inspired Spelunky. The basic ones, right? Like roguelikes, NetHack. I played a lot of NetHack, and just I don't know, Mario for platformers, right? Like every Mario, every platformer game that I've played.
Dude, the Mario.
So with Spelunky 2, I feel like this is the most Spelunky game that I've made. It's the one where I've been able to think about it in kind of the most sort of unique and personal way.
So with Spelunky 2, you had the foundation laid with Spelunky Classic. You talked about like, breaking away from these traditions. For you said Classic was just kind of building the gameplay of a roguelike meets a platformer. Was there, just to get us to Spelunky 2 timeline, what kind of traditions did you feel like you spent your creative effort on the Spelunky HD? That you were, since you didn't have to worry about that, did you focus
No.
on kind of a new tradition, or what did you focus on with the second game?
With the second game, I mean, a lot of that was just sort of getting the first game into that HD format. Andy Hall and I were doing a lot of work just, trying to figure out how to make our first console game. Neither of us had ever made a console game before. I think Andy had worked with a company at one point that did make an
wish
Xbox
that it
game,
wasn't
but
a
he
thing.
was more of a, I think he was more of a junior just member of that company. It was like a summer job kind of thing. So we were both going into it having very liberal experience to do this. And, with Microsoft, like I was very confident with them. Like, yeah, we can do this.
It's a great
And
story.
I
If you've never read the Spelunky book and you're listening, it's a great read, because like you're saying this and I'm like it was a lot that went into you just get like, you're like, yeah, we can do this, and you're in the background, you're like, how do we do this?
I didn't think we could. I just didn't know how at that point. There was a little bit of, it was a little bit of bluster, I think, just to get the project started. And I figured we'd find some way of doing it once we got started. It was like an opportunity, that I felt like we just couldn't pass up. I mean, when I first talked to Microsoft, Andy Hull was not even in the picture. He was a good friend of mine, but he had not offered to help me with doing the programming. And then even once he started working as a programmer, I don't think he knew that the extent to which he would be like the programmer. And he did much more too. He also did game design. He's a wonderful artist in his own right also. And a lot of his artwork, I think, made it into the final.
He came up with the golden monkey, right? That
was based on a character of his from when we were kids.
in a previous
when we
game
were
you
in the
made?
Click and Play community, yeah. He had a game called Golden Monkey Strike. So the Golden Monkey.
It's weird
all the
that I have
Cyclops
secondhand nostalgia
one
for Quick and
character,
Play.
And the Blue Bear are all.
That's where the
directly
Yeti
inspired by
thing
him.
comes from.
A lot of people have asked, like, where's the Blue Bear in Spelunky 2? And he's not a playable character because Andy was not working on Spelunky 2 in the same way. So
take that,
I
Andy.
mean, no, you saw he's in the.
He's in the credits. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why we didn't bring him back as a playable character, but still like honored with the credits.
All right, so to wrap up like the tradition segment, and cut me off if I'm wrong. Spelunky Classic, you're like, okay, how does this game work? Spelunky HD, you're like, let's just get this to the next kind of
To the
platform
moon.
HD. So then Spelunky 2, you don't have to worry about that, right? You kind of have the foundation. So what did you worry about, or where did you focus your creative energy for Spelunky 2?
With Spelunky 2, I think it was mostly just about putting in the work because I had this idea of what I wanted it to be from the beginning. And I think, we ended up staying pretty close to that idea, to that initial vision of it. So mostly it was just the effort of, I think, making it come to life, like the actual effort of the programming, doing the art and things like that. And I think there was a lot of work just like figuring out what things to pull out of Spelunky 1 and where to put it in Spelunky 2. So for Spelunky 2, there's nothing from Spelunky 1 that I felt like couldn't return necessarily in Spelunky 2. So like I had no qualms about like bringing things back, but I wanted to put them in a new context in Spelunky 2 and give them more features and things like that. Like the
Hello.
caveman, I think, is a perfect example of just
Good
character
morning.
from Spelunky 1 where I knew this caveman was going to come back. It's just like
Caveman,
in what
I'm
context
running.
is the caveman going to come back, right? So like, but I didn't want to change anything just for the sake of changing it. I think that was a key element of the design of Spelunky 2.
Before we kind of get into the lore type stuff, you said you had a vision early on from Spelunky 2, or what you wanted that to be. How would you describe that to someone that wants, like, what was your initial vision for Spelunky 2? What did you want to have happen?
Well, one thing I thought about was just what does a sequel mean to me? And to me, it is just like a huge expansion of previous
Fuck
games.
you.
So I knew that we weren't going to change anything core about Spelunky 1. And part of the reason why I wanted to do Spelunky 2 was because since Spelunky 1 had come out, like there has been an explosion of roguelike games, right? But I still felt like not a lot of them were really doing what Spelunky 1 did, which, you know, I think that's cool. I think that's
Why?
just how big this genre is.
Well, you're
right?
very
Like,
humble. Like you set the bar so high with the platforming roguelike with Spelunky, and I know you've heard this a lot, and I don't think, you know, for you to get this praise, you know, I'm sure it's an interesting thing to deal with, but you set the bar so high. I would imagine other people look at that and be like, how do you beat that? You know, how do you beat that? So I just wanted to interject because you're so humble. But so you set this bar. But anyways, go ahead.
I appreciate it. I think honestly though, I think it's just that other developers had other things that they wanted to do with it. I think Spelunky did sort of prove that, hey, roguelike is kind of like, it's kind of like RPG. Like you can have
I wish
roguelike
Rogue Legacy
elements
was as good
the
as
same way you
Spelunky.
can just have RPG elements in pretty much every game, right? Like if you want to add RPG elements to your game, you add some leveling, you add experience and things like that, and you've got RPG elements. And roguelikes, with roguelikes you can add some random level generation, you can add some permadeath and stuff, and you've got roguelike elements in your game.
Were you surprised?
It's a similarly broad like concept that you can apply to all kinds of stuff, and that's what I think Spelunky showed. But I think the reason why there's so many different roguelike games now is just like, yeah, everyone had their own opinion and own idea of what they wanted to do with it.
Were you surprised that there another, you don't want to call it Spelunky clone, but another, like something in the same, you could even put in the same silo as Spelunky? Because I feel, I mean, there really wasn't. Not to that extent.
Yeah, you know, I mean, one of the things that I think a lot of the roguelikes did that Spelunky doesn't do is they did start adding
Oh, that's where the cover
immediately
is.
started adding like progression systems in between runs, you know, where your character can actually get stronger just by doing runs. Like no matter what you do, like it'll get a little easier over time. And so, you know, that was one area where I felt like, hey, we can, with Spelunky 2, if we just kind of keep that aspect of keeping it very run-based from Spelunky 1, like it'll still be pretty unique, I think, in this new landscape of roguelikes.
Did you ever consider changing that at all? Or was it always this?
I didn't, because to me that is so core to Spelunky.
Fuck
And
yeah, Derek.
The thing is, I know it's one of those things where I know it actually kind of hurts the sort of mainstream acceptability of Spelunky, because people just they like that kind of progress. And I think for certain types of games, like I really like it too, you know, like it feels good. If it maybe more importantly, it feels bad, I think, to hit that wall where it just feels like you're not improving at a game, right? Like I've done so many runs and I just can't get out of the first area of the game. Like it feels bad. And you know, my hope is always that, well, if you persevere over that wall, then it's gonna feel extra good, right? Because you know you did it like all by yourself, and you know that you learned a lot about the game. And you know, it's an aspect of like old games that I do like. Like a lot of those games are just kind of cheap, which sucks, like cheap deaths and stuff like that. But I do like that when you get like really good at the game and you beat it, like you just did it all yourself, pretty much. Like the game did not help you per se.
Yeah.
And so that was, you know, that's like a concept that I think is very, very much in like it's very much unique to Spelunky, and I think it's actually something that's pretty unique to just like the traditional roguelikes. I think Spelunky of action roguelikes, I feel like Spelunky takes, I don't want to say the most because I don't know about like all the games out there, but it certainly takes, I think, a lot from traditional roguelikes compared to other action roguelikes these days. And I'm still like very much inspired by traditional roguelikes, even though I don't really play them like a ton. I still spend a lot of time like reading about them and studying them, and I think there's a lot that we can still learn from them.
So when you talk about your vision for Spelunky 2, you said keeping things kind of the core Spelunky, not changing anything in terms of what people or what the gameplay loop is to be expected. So what else did you, in that initial vision, which by the way, when was that? When did you say, hey, I'm ready to do another sequel, roughly?
It was like right around when I was writing the book about Spelunky, because I was spending a lot of time thinking about Spelunky while I was writing it. I'd already had like ideas of maybe doing a sequel, but I think they really solidified while I was working on the book, because to write the book, I had to go back and
to the wasted time.
Our old emails about the game and stuff. I don't have a great memory about just the game development, the game development that I've been a part of. I'm not like John Romero. Like, I'm always just so impressed with John Romero, because he will just like recall the exact day that he thought of some idea, and he always mentions like every mission of Doom by its exact name, like E7M
What?
3 or something like that, and I just would
Why
not
he do
ever
that?
be able to do that.
So for
But
context,
to answer your question, when I was working on the book, which was like 5 years ago or something like that, is when I started thinking, okay, I'm thinking so much about Spelunky 1, and that of course is just making me think about what I would like to do with Spelunky more, and how a sequel could actually make sense in this context.
And so as you're doing that, as you're writing, you're like, okay, hey, look, here's some ideas, or here's where I'd want to take the sequel. What else was really important to you in that vision in creating this sequel?
So I just felt like with Spelunky's characters and its mechanics, and just on a technical level, there was just so much more we could do in terms of, just expanding on that. I think very simply just expanding on that. So if you think about what we did with Spelunky 1, it's like kind of this circle, I just felt like we could take it further, and I didn't know where that boundary was, but I had an idea of things that we could start with, right?
Man.
What were some of those early ideas that
and-
you're like, this is an early thing that I think would work?
Well, very early on, actually, I had a
I
call
thought
with
I
Andy
chose the
Hull.
wrong time to
He's
fall
the
asleep
one
there.
who suggested adding the second layer in the back,
It's a train.
because I was telling him, hey, I want to
Yeah,
do a
so-
sequel, and I just wanted to know what he thought about that, because he was such a big part of Spelunky 1. And and I think in a way I kind of wanted to get his blessing on doing the sequel, even though I was pretty sure he wanted to work on his own projects at that point and wouldn't be part. So I kind of wanted to just get his thoughts, and also kind of get his blessing
Permission.
to work on it.
Did you ask, or was it kind of just, you could tell in the tone of voice? Did you flat out ask him, or no?
I think I just asked him like, "What do you think?" I don't think it was like a Godfather like asking for his approval kind of thing. I kind of figured he would. I wasn't expecting him to be like, no, you can't do without me. And also, I'm gonna be busy for like the next however many years. So yeah, come at me then with your idea. No, but he came up with the second layer thing. I knew that I did want to do online multiplayer for Spelunky 2, because it was a feature that was asked for a lot. I knew that Blit was going to be the only partner that could really make some of that stuff happen, like technically, because I think that and,
Blitbricks
like,
is better than
the liquid
Nintendo.
physics was an early thing.
And
A lot of
online.
major stuff. I think branching paths also, and there's some really obvious stuff, like you want to make the chain just even longer and kind of more secretive and mysterious. I knew I wanted to approach the art style from a different way. As a visual artist, I approach all of my games from like a very visual standpoint. And I knew I wanted to take another crack at that, because I was still very much learning with Spelunky 1. I mean, you're always learning, but like with Spelunky 1, I had to do like a lot of experimenting. And I felt like, I hadn't quite gotten the art style where I wanted it to. But other than that, it was just like, I think more generally thinking we have all of these elements in place with Spelunky 1. How do we just make them bigger, better, more interesting? You know, I think it's as simple as stuff like you have the crush tracks
No.
in the temple in Spelunky 1.
Oh, I
What
fucked
if we
it.
just had like a really big version of that? You know, it's not super heady, like deep philosophical stuff, but that does change the game, and especially with a game like Spelunky, you put all that stuff together, and these seemingly small changes like really add up to something bigger. So, in a lot of ways, it's just as simple as just making like a bigger version of Spelunky.
What?
Pushing everything to its limit. And I think that comes out as sometimes just like literally
just
making
happened?
stuff bigger. You know, like literally just making like a bigger trap or like a crazier version of an existing trap.
Do you have I know it's probably hard to pick out, but do you have if you had to pick a favorite of something you made bigger, like physically bigger, from Spelunky 1 or Spelunky HD to Spelunky 2, is there anything there like, this was kind of my baby, I'm really excited
Well, I
about
love
this?
the idea very early on of Olmec returning just like in the middle of the game and then just being like a crazy boss fight. I like the idea of it starting off exactly as it did in Spelunky 1, so that people would be like, hey, what's going on? Did I reach the end of the game?
Why?
And also, Derek, you lazy bum, like you're just like reusing Olmec from Spelunky 1 and then having it change on people. I really like that. The idea, I think, of just putting stuff from Spelunky 1 in Spelunky 2 in a new context and having that really change how you feel about it, how you interact with it, that was really cool to me. And I just loved having the chance to do that, which is one of the reasons why I was so excited to do a sequel. And also at that time, like, indie game developers weren't doing a ton of sequels. Not so much. It was like just starting to happen, right? Like, I think, there was like Hotline Miami 2 and stuff, but indies were kind of known for just making one game and then just making like a completely different game in another genre. And so I was really interested in seeing like what would a sequel be like, just building on an existing concept and just building on existing success too with that concept. To me, that seemed fun, because Spelunky 1 was sort of like a test for that, because it wasn't a sequel per se, but it was like a remake of Spelunky Classic. And so working on Spelunky 1, I saw how fun it was to basically get to do like a fan game of your own game, And I think working on a sequel is kind of like that. It's we were talking before about, being inspired by other games and stuff. And I think you do always have to look out for being like, too inspired. Like what is kind of unique and personal to me, and what is sort of coming from my background of playing other games. With Spelunky 2, it was great because it's like I'm just gonna be like inspired mostly by my previous work, and so it was really cool to just, I think, kind of be completely free to take from Spelunky 1 and then repurpose, reimagine, and add new things also, and just like completely change it up. But it's really cool to have that blueprint of Spelunky 1 to work with.
If you'll allow me the comparison, it's like, you're like George Lucas. You have the Star Wars universe already built, and you can take pieces of that. But I do want to, because I read this in a really recent interview you just did. You said that Spelunky 2, like thematically for you, your games don't really reflect like, oh, it's my life experience in this game. Like I'm really, guy Spelunky trying to do this. But you said like there's a theme throughout this one about family and community, and that's woven throughout this game. Is there a reason you felt, or why you wanted to do that with Spelunky 2?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of see like my progression as a person from Spelunky Classic to Spelunky 2. I think Spelunky Classic, I see that as just an exploration of just mechanics, just being like really interested in the mechanics of games and systems and how they interact and things like that. And then with Spelunky 1 on Xbox 360, I think
No.
very much it was
Don't do
about
that.
like mastery and the joy of being really good at something. And I feel like getting good at anything is it just improves your life and makes you a better person. You know, I think there's criticism of games from people who are not familiar with games. Hey, you're just like wasting your time. Like you got really good at this game. How does that apply to quote unquote real life? But you just by getting good at anything, even if it's in a virtual world and these are virtual skills, I think it changes the way you look at life. I think it changes the way you think about things, and it helps you get good at other things, because the discipline it takes to get good at playing a video game can easily apply to making a video game or doing anything else. And also, it just feels good, and I think we should accept that just feeling good is like a great part of life, right? So yeah, just entertainment or whatever, just art, that doesn't make any sense to me. So Spelunky 1 on Xbox, I think, was very much about mastery, getting good at something, and I think I was thinking about that a lot working on the game. Andy and I were working hard. Eric did the music for Spelunky 1, and yeah, we were like a trio. We were at a point, I think, in all of our careers where we were young and we were still like feeling things out and trying to get better at our craft. And I think that really came out in Spelunky 1, which, to me, I see as a less refined game than Spelunky 2, but also like I see the energy that all three of us put into it as like these young people. And then with Spelunky 2, well, between Spelunky 1 and Spelunky 2, I got married, I had a kid, and Spelunky 1 did well, which is great, and it was like another big turning point in my life, and I think it changed the way I saw things again. And so now Spelunky 2 to me, it's a more mature video game that also reflects that I'm interested in things other than game mechanics, game systems, and just like getting really good at my work. Now I have a family, and I'm seeing like how important that is, how important it is to have friends. The Spelunky community, I think.
Wow, Derek flexing his friends on me.
Came out, and I saw how important that was. Just how cool that was, but also like how important they were in the success of the game, and I think in helping people get into Spelunky that wouldn't otherwise get into it. And so that's one of the reasons why Spelunky 2 has like its own little community in it. And I think I'm always, there's this concept of like the lonely game where you're just like the lone hero, and basically every other character is it's just kind of off to the side, and you have to kind of like carry all this weight on your shoulders. I think with Spelunky
Animal
2,
Crossing.
I wanted to put forth the idea that that is never the case, and also I just wanted people to like not feel lonely playing Spelunky 2, even if they're playing a single player, right? Like there are other characters in this world that do care about you, and that also have their own lives and business. I think the quest characters are a big part of that too. Just making the world feel more alive, more like a living, breathing place. So that's kind of I think that's like the big sort of emotional arc of Spelunky, if you want to call it that. And there's me in like all of my games. I just tend not to make games that are like very directly thematically tied to my life, you know. So it's not a game about Derek, you, the family man, right? But that comes out in a game about exploring caves, anyways.
And for you, so there are, a lot of new characters in the game. When you make those decisions to put new characters in the game, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I remember seeing some like ridiculous feedback about the game and character selection, but there's a lot of female characters you can pick in the game. I mean, is that not directly homage to your daughter, but to be like, hey, look, here's an example of a game where there's not just one or two girls you can play.
I fucked it.
Yeah, I was already on that, I think, the road of thinking about that stuff. It's like I said, it's hard to think about everything with the same amount of energy when you're working on a game. So with Spelunky
cool. Okay.
Spelunky Classic, sorry, I was just thinking mostly about the mechanics, and so like I took a lot of inspiration from like adventure movies and Indiana Jones and adventure video games like cave exploration video games and stuff like that. And I just I didn't put a lot of thought into the characters, to be perfectly honest. And so it's been interesting, I think, having to kind of deal with that thoughtlessness as the game progressed, right? And you can very clearly see that in the evolution of the damsel, right? From being like barely a character to, well, now you have a choice if we want to say to, hey, the damsel is now Demi Von Diamonds. You can play as her and your rescue pets. So I was already kind of like on my way to thinking harder about this stuff. And then, yeah, you have a kid and that just seems to just drive home like every point you've been already thinking about.
What was with the
And
dust
so then it was just
particles
really
there?
obvious.
That was weird.
I thought to myself, like, yeah, we did have some really cool playable female characters in Spelunky 1, but why not like exactly half, like exactly 50%? The world is exactly 50% like women, right? Women and girls. And so why not do that? It's so obvious after you realize it, and it is like more than obvious when you have women in your life, right? And so and I think especially with kids, because you have to put yourself in your kids' shoes, and they're also, I think, just blank when they start out. And like I was saying before, I saw how important it was for my daughter that she was able to play as a girl in like every single game. Like every single game she'd ask like, like, can you play as her? Can you play as her? Can you play as her? Right? And it's like, I didn't bring that topic up at all. It's just she cares. And I think, for me, I realized like, yeah, well, that's not something I asked when I was a kid, because I was like completely full on characters, you know what I mean? Although, I think as I got older, I was like, hey, why aren't there more like Asian characters in this game? It just makes people feel good, I think, to see themselves in games. And it's just,
No.
as a developer, when you realize
That was not where I
you wanna
wanted to
make
live to.
people feel good in those ways. Like, the ways I want to make people feel bad are just like getting killed by a spider trap. I don't want to make them feel bad because they just cannot find a character that even like remotely looks like them.
Are there
it's
any?
just not a way that I want to make people feel bad. And the game is also perfect for having lots of very diverse characters, and it was fun. And it ends up, thinking about it in that way ends up making the game better, because you just start thinking about the characters, period, more than you would originally. So now I'm thinking a little bit more about the representation of the characters, and I'm starting to think more just about them as people and their backstories and stuff, and like what I want to put in the journal and things like that, and it makes it more interesting. And then I've got the interesting challenge of all these characters that I kind of created for the previous games where I didn't put as much thought into them, and now they, I want to bring a lot of them back and give them their own backstory.
Where is Eskimo?
Together, and it ends up being just, I think, a very interesting, fun problem. And a lot of the stories I've heard, are just from parents playing the game with their kids. And in particular, I've heard like a lot of stories of parents playing with their daughters, and they're playing as Princess Erin. Like, people specifically mentioned that, like, she's playing as the princess, and I'm just like, that's awesome. She has a character, and she's gonna like love video games that much more because of it. So it's cool. I feel like it's a great opportunity to.
I haven't been talking, but this is like
It's a
the most
win-win
wholesome shit. I
situation,
love it.
really, because your character design gets better. You bring the game to more people, and you make them happier.
So now a kid who's like a blank slate of games is gonna play Spelunky 2. They're gonna be excited about the character, and then they're gonna say, "Why does the game designer hate me so much? And why does he hurt me so much?"
They're like, "Mommy, why does Derek hate us so much? Why did
he take away
bring
my
this upon
jetpack?"
us?" Well, I'm hoping that what they'll learn is a good lesson about perseverance and failure. I will say, I see a lot of parallels between parenting and game design. I can't help it. Like, I'm a game designer, and when I look at my daughter, in a way, she's like the biggest player, for me to kind of game design for, right? Because I'm like, for her, I'm like, in some ways, designing like the game of life for her,
Well, even just the quip that you gave us about playing Mario Kart. Like, okay, you play Mario Kart by yourself. Now let me just add in one variable.
Fuck
like
you.
that's gotta be cool and rewarding for you.
Well, it's like with kids, you have to challenge them in the same way you have to challenge players, right? But you want them to learn and eventually become independent, and I think that's kind of a big part of my just natural game philosophy. Also, is I want players to be very independent, and in the end, I want them to be independent, and to me, that means not always holding their hand through all the challenges of playing the game. And I think it's the same with life too, right? Like, you want to provide like enough challenge and give kids like enough independence that eventually that they can, go on
Something happened at that top
and play
level.
some hard games without you, right? Like, get that 1 CC on your own. Get that 1 CC on life. We're gonna play co-op for a while, but like at some point you gotta take the training wheels off and then get that 1 CC yourself, and enjoy
Get that
the
CO
process
win.
too.
So to circle back from 1cc back to the characters in the game, are there any characters in the game that are on the cutting room floor that didn't make the cut? And what was your process to be like, hey, this is who needs to be in the game?
Part of it was kind of a popularity contest, and I did want characters who it seemed like players really enjoyed from Spelunky 1 to come back. Of course, you end up cutting some characters, and you realize that there are a ton of people that love that character. Right? Like, as soon as the character's gone, that's when, that's when all of the like Lime characters, they come out of the woodwork and they're like, what? So yeah, so it's difficult. I think it's a balancing act of wanting to include some new characters, realizing I probably didn't have it in me to do more than 20 characters for Spelunky 2, because it's by far, for me, like the most intensive part of the game, like art-wise at least, is just doing the animations for all those characters. And I did try hard to like set up a system of making it as easy as possible. I've got this like huge Photoshop file with all the characters in it, but it's just like a really draining task to do all those animations for them. And I wanted to like give them a little more personality, like give them more, give them like their unique ropes and a little bit more of like a unique look. like you know, in Spelunky 1, the characters are much more like templated, where just their outfits and stuff are a little more similar. So for Spelunky 2, you know, like Coco has the lemur on her head and stuff. And those just take like extra work to add those little details that aren't the same from character to character. So it's a balancing act, and you always know that you're gonna make some people a little bit unhappy, but you gotta do it, you know.
Was there any part of you in this process thinking, okay, hey, look, this is what I want him to look like? Did you ever consider having someone else do that? Or was that
Fucking
never
caveman.
an option for you? You wanted to do it?
Good thing I waited.
For me, it was a big step just hiring Justin to work with us to do the character art.
Yeah.
Like the character illustrations, I should say. Because I'd never worked with an artist in that capacity before. Like with Andy, he did do a lot of the art, but you know, a lot of it was kind of UI stuff. And I think, honestly, he intended it mostly as a placeholder when he put it in, and I would kind of like touch it up. But you know, a lot of his placeholder art, for Andy, he's just such an exacting person that a lot of his placeholder art was just straight up good enough. He just likes to look, like when he's working on a game, like he just likes to look nice. Like at any point of the development, like he wants it to look nice while he's working on it. So he would just, if he needed like a UI element, he had to program it in. I was busy doing something else, he would just paint it himself and pop it in. So I've just never worked with like an artist where they had the explicit job of like making extra artwork, like final artwork that was going to go in
Nope,
the game the
don't
same way
like
as
that.
Justin. So that was kind of like my step toward that, and it worked out really well. I wondered if it would feel
I'm gonna use this guy
too
to
strange
denote
or
where that
something to see
goes.
someone else's artwork in there, but I think our styles mesh pretty well, and
don't
in the
have
end,
any ropes left.
it's just awesome. Like I love seeing Justin's art
Ugh,
everywhere. You know,
stole my clone gun.
like his art,
It's just a
his painting
bite.
of Anna and of the bats and the snakes, like on the title screen, are in like all of our key art, our game icons and stuff like that. And it's great. And you know, we couldn't finish the game when we did without him, because it's a ton of work.
Why was that hard for you to make that decision or be okay with that decision to bring on an artist or work with another artist?
I've just always approached my games from like a very visual standpoint. Drawing was like my first love. You know, like the first games that I designed were just like on paper when I was a kid. And so it's very hard for me to kind of like separate the game from the visual aspect of it, because I see it in my head in like a visual way, and you know, I want to do the art for it. And it's just a part of game development also that I like really enjoy too. So I think it'd be difficult for me to make a game where I'm just doing design and directing artists, because I would just so want to like go in and do some art myself. You know, not because anyone is doing like a worse job than me. It's just like I just really love drawing. So.
Well, that's funny. On your Instagram, I saw you did like Inktober. You did, you know, a new, I think it was goblin drawing every day. And I always look at them, and then it took me a minute, because there would always be 2 posts, or most of the time be 2 posts, and be like, the art's very different. And then it finally clicked that you weren't the only person that was doing the art on your Instagram posts. Did you brought that up with your daughter to do like the challenge?
Yeah, we've been doing Inktober for quite a few years now. Is it 3? It might even be 4. So she started doing Inktober with me very early on, and she's awesome.
Well, that takes away the tree.
Because the reason why Inktober is so hard for adults is because you're like trying to, you know, like make it look quote unquote good enough to put on Twitter or something, and everyone wants to have like a really cool, like nifty theme like across the entire month that they stick with. For my daughter, she just draws whatever she wants every day, and she also loves the fact that she always finishes before me. She's like, I'm done. Oh, you're slower than me, aren't you? I'm like, yes, I am. But it's cool to see how laid back.
Derek, you more like Derek
laid
Not
back
fast.
kids are about it in general, and it's helped me be a little more laid back too, and a little bit less of a perfectionist with Inktober. I wanted to do it with her just for fun, but I do think Inktober is it's a great way to practice finishing stuff and being a little less perfectionist, because it's actually much harder than it looks. And you see a lot of people start and they get a few days in and they have to stop, and part of it I think is that perfectionism, especially because you have to, part of the challenge is to post on Twitter and stuff. So if if you're having trouble, I think, finishing like your projects, I tell game developers, like, it's not game development, but it's a good exercise to try. It's only a month long, and you will get the basic feeling of every part of game development. You'll get that initial like giddy excitement of, yay, I'm starting a game, and the first couple of days you're like, this is so awesome, this is great, this is so fun. And then very quickly you're like, oh man, okay, I'm starting to get a little tired of doing this, and like, oh, like when I started this Inktober thing, I kind of thought I would just have like a couple free hours every day to do it, but it turns out like, today I woke up and I just didn't feel so great, and then now I'm like, I've got to like travel today or whatever.
That exit was pretty horrendous.
Like a lot of our Inktober's, not now obviously, but like in previous years, we had stuff we had to like travel to during the month, and would just be doing our Inktober's on the road, right? So you realize like midway through, okay, this is actually kind of a slog. It's like kind of a grind, and also real life is intruding in a way that I just did not expect it to when I started the project. And just like with Inktober, in the middle of a video game project, like that's when you want to stop, or that's when other game ideas start to pop up in your head, and they sound more exciting because you're not in the middle of them. They're just like potential ideas, and you've got to have that discipline to kind of push through and finish it off. And then, yeah, by the end of Inktober, like, I'm exhausted, and I'm just like barely getting it done, but I'm happy that I finished it, because that's like one more thing that I finished. That's a little more experience I have finishing something.
Is there anything you've done discipline-wise that has helped you? Like someone's listening being like, all right, hey, I need to finish this, but I keep dropping off. Is there anything that you specifically done over the years that have helped you to kind of hone that discipline?
I think the biggest thing is just, in a general sense, not thinking about every project as its own individual separate thing, but as part of your life and part of a long string of things you're going to do. So thinking about it as a smaller part of that whole, I think you're able to be a little more okay with some of the imperfections of it. And it's very difficult when you're starting out, like making your first game, especially if you're starting out and you're making kind of like a bigger, more like a commercial game or something like that. I was fortunate that I kind of got my start making games in the click and play community, where we were a bunch of kids.
Fuck, that was dangerous. Why did I do that?
We were using click and play, and there was like a little bit of pressure from like the other young people in this community to finish your game, but we were also like raw material at that point, and we didn't have all the pressures of making a game that's as good as like the commercial AAA games that we were playing at the time. We were just a bunch of kids making games for a bunch of kids, and so as a result, like, I actually finished like a bunch of small games at that time, and was able to see the entire development through from beginning to end, just on a small scale. So that's what Inktober feels like too. It's just like you get all the same feelings just within the span of a month, and it's a less intense investment of your time. So I think getting that practice of finishing smaller things, it's like it gives you the exact same feelings as a bigger one. It's just like if you're eventually going to run like an ultra marathons, right? Like, first just start by running a mile and getting like good and consistent at doing that, and then slowly get bigger and bigger. And then just more generally see each project as a smaller part of like all the projects you're going to work on. I think a lot of game developers, if you're like an indie developer and you're like making a game, they feel like this is like my one shot and I gotta make this game perfect. And they end up putting a lot of work, I think, in the final years of the project that honestly are giving them marginal returns in terms of like how successful the game is gonna eventually be. Because what happens is when you start, you don't know like which ideas of yours that you like. You don't know how many other people are going to also like them, and if it's your job, like it does matter how many people are gonna enjoy your game and want to buy it. And not only that, like people are looking at your game based on, I think, a lot of superficial stuff like just screenshots and stuff like that, and you kind of have to learn over time like how to make a successful game, right? It's just like where is that overlap of the games I like and the games that other people like? Where does that overlap the most? So for your first few games, like you just need to kind of like get those games out and see what people think, so you can kind of learn that stuff. But I think what happens is game development takes so long, and you put so much effort into it that it just feels like, well, I've already spent like a couple years on this. I may as well like spend another couple more years just polishing the heck out of this game, not realizing that those like next 2 years really didn't have a huge effect on their sales in the end. And that was time that they could have spent maybe exploring like another idea,
So earlier you brought up this feedback, and maybe that's time where like you could put a game out and get the feedback and change it. I want to get into like a little bit more specific about Spelunky 2, as we kind of wrap things up here. You talked about like when you released the trailer, the very first trailer, and you talked about this feeling of exuberance and all this stuff. What was some of the tougher feedback you remember? Do you remember getting tough feedback regarding anything on the trailer or when the game was released that made you think a little bit, or at least think and then get rid of it, or think and act on it?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think the first like gameplay trailer, there was a lot of feedback about the art just looking flat. And yeah, I think that was true. The art had not. There was still like quite a lot of work to be done on the art at that point. And also, I think there's a big difference playing the game full screen on your monitor versus like looking at it in a tiny thumbnail on Twitter. And so I was like, yeah, the compression is rough on the game right now. But we put the trailer out knowing that the game wasn't like done yet, and it wasn't perfect. I think as an indie developer, you're not always afforded the chance of putting out like a trailer that like only shows off the game in a super nice way. But part of the reason why I put trailers out is not just to like market the game to people, but it's also to get feedback. It's another indie thing. All these things you do as an indie developer, they have multiple purposes. So I'm putting the trailer out to get that feedback and see what people think, and then make adjustments. And so right after that trailer came out, I definitely started putting there's definitely like a period right after the trailer came out where I just
so tired.
worked a lot.
Did you take any of that feedback personal, or are you at a point now where you're like, hey, I have my armor up, I can take this for what it is? Because I know.
Yeah, now my armor is definitely up. I mean, in general, like I just really try not to take that kind of stuff personally either. I mean, I don't know. We're all internet users, and I think hopefully most of us, are trying to be kind. But when you think like nobody's watching, you see a trailer, like you say what you think about it, right? Like I get that, and I think the other thing is just that, you know, I think I kind of lost my train of thought. Oh yes, I remember what I was gonna say. So the other thing is that when you're just starting out, you know how bad it feels to be ignored as an artist. So, you know, I think in the end that's kind of the worst thing, is just to put out a trailer and nobody comments, right? And so for me, if I see a lot of people comment and a lot of them are like, oh, the art style looks so flat, like I wish it looked like Spelunky 1. I'd much rather they say that than not care about the game. So that's something, you know, I definitely think about, which helps. And then the other thing is just, you have to make use of the feedback, you have to be a little thick-skinned to just be able to evaluate it objectively. And you know, I always get defensive initially. You know, like with any kind of feedback, and including just like you know, feedback from people I'm working with. It's just the nature of things, right? Like, you put out an idea, and you're like, this is a great idea. You get challenged on it, and you're like, no, you're wrong. You're wrong.
I can't see you saying that. I haven't this
Wait, what?
conversation, but maybe it's a little different.
No, I definitely talk.
Where did Bliss go?
You know, everything stuff, you know. Just like you know, when you're like,
Is there any comments? I mean, not that you can laugh. Are there any comments that you remember be like, is this for real? About Spelunky 2?
I mean, I think even with the art style stuff, where
I was holding A. I forgot it ends at
agree that there
98.
was a grain of truth.
I think that fucked it.
And you see things
Just a little
differently
bit.
once
That's
the
okay,
game
Derek.
is
Don't
public
stress.
in any form. It's the strangest thing, but it's seeing your game like in a trailer. Even seeing the trailer like before it's published to YouTube, like it just looks different than once it's actually published to YouTube. Or it's like even just like a tweet, right? You're like, yeah, this tweet looks great, and then you put it out, and as soon as it goes live, and like you get that first like or whatever on it, you're like, oh my god, why did I say that way? It's this weird thing about things being published where it's like it's in a different font or something. All of a sudden you just like read it in a completely different way. But you know, even when the trailer first came out, I thought it was funny because, you know, people were saying like, I love the art from Spelunky 1. Why can't it just look like that? And that's exactly what people said about Spelunky 1. They're like, I like the way Spelunky Classic looks. Why can't it look like that? And it's you do realize that people they do like what they're used to also. So it's difficult because you get feedback and there is truth to the criticism.
Sans.
Then at the same time, you know there's a little bit of like
Joe Sanser.
well, I just don't like it.
San
It's new
Severino.
mixed in there, and so you kind of have to see like, well, how much
More like
what they're
Sans 4.
saying is true. And
I'm so
should be-
tired.
should be
6 a.m.
implemented. And that's a difficult part of taking feedback, I think, as a game developer, as an artist, because people do generally like what they're comfortable with, and they can only sort of tolerate like a certain amount of newness in things. I mean, think about like Wind Waker, right? Remember?
Yeah, that's
when Wind
yeah,
Waker
it's a complete
came out,
shift.
and it's just so funny now. It's like it stands up to the test of time. Like it's so iconic.
Well, it's like, and then if you did the artwork from Spelunky 1 and Spelunky 2, people are like, oh, he didn't change any. Like it looks exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. So there was definitely like a lot of truth to the idea of it looking flat, and I looked at the comparisons and stuff, and I agreed. And part of that was just we're at a point.
Look,
in
Gary, there I am.
I could not afford to spend all my time just polishing the art. Like we had to move forward on other parts of the game. Because with game development, like for me, it's very important that I'm not just working on one thing, or that our team's not working on one thing all the time. Like these things kind of have to move up together. Unfortunately, that means with a trailer, like we can't just, you know, put out like a very small snapshot of the game where the art is just like incredible and then everything else like outside of the trailer is just complete jank. You know, like at that point the game, like everything was kind of at the same level, because I think that's required to eventually like finish a game and have everything release at the same level too. You know, like you want all parts of the game to work together well.
All right, Derek. Well, as we wrap stuff up, if you're open to it, I'd like to do like a speed round, and this is going to be some like Spelunky 2 specific, where like we got the guy in the chair. We don't want we don't want the mystery. We want the hard answers.
Info from me that I'm not ready to give out just by like putting me in the hot seat.
But and you know, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. Also from the live chat, if you guys have questions, I've got a few. But first and foremost, this is a specific question about Waddler. Does Waddler move around?
Let me look real quick at my Moss ranking. So my old personal best was a 139.06. So this is a little bit over 5 minutes improvement. And I think my third time beating Cosmic ever. Pretty solid run, aside from losing Jetpack. I have to rewatch that because I do not know what happened. I think it must have like reflected off the bubble, but I don't get what gave it downward momentum. I don't have characters. I don't have characters unlocked, so I can't look through the telescope. Wow. Foiled again. Guess I should unlock the characters. Alright, if you enjoyed this Cosmic Ocean speedrun, leave a like. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. See you later.